So it's wonderful to have Kevin Jarvis with us today. Kevin is a senior geophysicist and QI advisor with HiSeis, who has spent his whole career thinking about seismic. So, with his passion for the use of seismic as a key investigation tool, it's going to be wonderful hearing from him today about seismic, the future of mining. So, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining.
Thanks, Jessica, for the introduction. I would first like to take a moment to thank all those that have contributed to this presentation. The final products I am showing have passed through many hands at HiSeis, from acquisition to processing to interpretation, and every step is important to obtain a high-quality product. Special thanks to Dr. Chris, who spent many hours perfecting the embedded videos. I would also like to acknowledge the mining companies that have allowed us to show their data, the Tropicana joint venture partners for the Tropicana data, and Perseus Mining for the RA data. This is a presentation about seismic and how it can have a significant impact on the development of mineral resources. I will start by briefly introducing the seismic method and then focus on two case histories where the results demonstrate the value of the seismic and the transformation of the seismic to more intuitive volumes. What is the seismic method? Seismic involves the generation of sound waves at the surface of the Earth and recording the reflected signal on an array of geophones on the surface. The sound waves look a lot like the ripples in a pond when you throw a stone into the water. At each geophone, we get a seismic trace. The line of geophones give us a seismic profile. Here is an example of seismic from the RA gold mine in Côte d'Ivoire. The individual traces are closely spaced, with a variation in color intensity representing the amplitude of the seismic signals. The peaks are red and the troughs are black. The image shows a wide variation in reflectivity that is due to the complex geology at the site. I will be discussing this volume in more detail later in the presentation. Collecting high-quality seismic for mining has a number of challenges that should be considered in the planning and costing phase of the seismic survey. Steep dips, both in the faults and in the stratigraphy, require careful survey planning and modeling to address. The geologic complexities are usually 3D in nature, which requires a properly configured 3D seismic survey to ensure all prospective targets can be imaged. The regolith is a highly variable zone between the surface and the top of fresh rock and can cause interference to the propagating seismic wave field. This zone can vary in both composition and thickness across the seismic survey. Many mine sites have continuously operating mechanical equipment that is a source of noise. The seismic source must be powerful enough to ensure the noise does not seriously degrade the final processed seismic volume. Survey design must consider all the obstacles typical of mine sites: pipelines, steep slopes, exclusion zones due to existing infrastructure, tailings dams, and open pits, etc. The survey design must properly consider steep subsurface dips. The red dot is the source location, and the pink line represents a seismic wave propagating through the Earth and bouncing off a dipping reflector before returning to the surface. The top figure shows a short array of receivers that are not capable of recording reflections from the dipping interface. The middle scenario also falls short. It is only the bottom layout which is able to record the reflections, which can be unexpectedly distant from the source. Due to the longer pass, the source must be strong enough to image the reflector with receivers and shots appropriately positioned. Many of the challenges of mining seismic relate to the choice of source. While smaller energy sources may seem like a good idea, they often lack the energy required to meet the imaging objective. I will use an aerial photo analog to explain the importance of detail and extrapolation using limited information. If we have a lot of information in a small area, it allows us to fully understand that area. In this case, we can see a clear outline of a building. As we try to understand the surrounding area, we start with a very coarse sampling scale. At this scale, we can start to believe some of these other features might also be buildings. They have approximately the same size and color. We increase the sampling, and perhaps our previous interpretation requires some adjustment. But nevertheless, we see many features that could also be buildings, possibly of different colors. When we finally get a full suite of detailed information, we realize how complex the image really is. There are other buildings in the area, but they are spread apart, and the most important observation has eluded us, and that is that most of the surrounding objects are not buildings at all, but airplanes of various sizes. In 2020, HiSeis acquired and processed a 3D seismic survey at the Yare gold mine in Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa. The indicated and inferred resources are 4 million ounces. The seismic survey covers a total area of 16 square kilometers, which also includes the mine infrastructure. The survey consists of source and receiver lines shown here in red and blue. Notice that the lines are not straight. This is due to the presence of obstacles, such as an open pit and steeper terrain. Due to the overlapping coverage in the plan design, these non-straight portions do not have a significant impact on the final processed volumes. Here is a view of the exploration activity from the surface and around the pit. The gold assays from the drilling are shown as red and yellow boxes and show the extent of known mineralization, most of which appears concentrated in a relatively small area with only small intercepts in the nearby rocks. The drill holes colored red are the deeper exploration drill holes, attempting to extend the mineralization to depth. They are limited in number due to the expense of drilling deep drill holes. We remove the drilling and assays to show only the gold mineralization. The extension of the mineralization spatially and at depth is limited because in this complex geologic environment, you cannot reliably extrapolate beyond existing drilling. This is where the seismic comes in. It allows us to see beyond the postage stamp of information around the existing drilling. The Yare seismic is a 3D volume of data represented here by a grid of orthogonal lines referred to as inlines and crosslines. The data is of high quality with coherent amplitudes related to both structure and stratigraphy. One of these high amplitude reflections can be traced through the volume and most likely represents large-scale faulting. Scrolling through the volume in the inline and crossline directions reveal the overall geologic complexity of the area. When we overlay the mineralization onto the seismic, we can match the narrow, structurally controlled zones with seismic reflections showing similar structural dips. This gives us confidence that the seismic data is reliably imaging structures associated with mineralization. Looking beyond the known mineralization, a large number of similar structures are apparent in the seismic volume that become good targets for exploration drilling. The surface in yellow is the CMA, which represents a key structural surface related to mineralization. The CMA was interpreted by tying the existing drill holes and extended deeper using the seismic as a guide. Another zone is highlighted in gray and represents a quiet zone in the seismic volume. Based on analogous features in other seismic volumes that have been drilled, this most likely represents a large intrusive body situated directly below the main mine site mineralization. A full interpretation of the seismic volume shows a complex network of structural elements. The mine scale data represents a small postage stamp insight into the larger scale geology. The seismic reveals this bigger picture and allows us to put the mine geology into context and to better understand the likely sources of mineralization and where additional mineralization may be located. The idea of using sound waves to create images may seem like an unusual idea. However, in reality, most people are familiar with the use of sound waves for imaging in the medical world. Here we have an ultrasound of a baby. Ultrasound uses sound waves sent through a body to image the structure of living tissue. Seismic uses sound waves to produce internal images of the Earth. The early days of ultrasound created very simple images of the baby. Over time, the medical researchers were able to apply more advanced processing techniques to create detailed 3D images that significantly improve our visualizations of the baby. The application of similar technology to seismic can produce more intuitive images of the Earth. The seismic image is composed of a large number of single traces representing the subsurface in 3D. However, we don't know the geological profile. What we desire is technology that converts the seismic into something like the geologic profile. Knowing that each trace represents a possible geological profile, we can do what is called inversion. Here, we take the seismic data, remove the wavelet, and come up with a rock profile. The inversion technique we have used is referred to as geostatistical inversion. The seismic, drill hole, and everything else we know or assume about the Earth nearby the seismic is input, and the outputs are a series of rock models that statistically match the inputs. The outputs are not unique, showing variability from one model to the next, and each model output equally honors the input seismic data. A key part of the inversion process is to ensure we have a good understanding of how the seismic links to the drill hole data. The black line represents a typical deviated drill hole starting from the surface and extending 1,200 meters into the Earth. The orientation of stratigraphy is shown by the two parallel red lines. After collecting core in the drill hole, we can identify the different rock types shown here by red and blue colors. In the same drill hole, we acquire elastic log data, P velocity and density, that combined give us P impedance. The P impedance log allows us to synthesize seismic by combining with the seismic wavelet. The synthesized seismic can now be compared to the real seismic, and the matching of seismic amplitudes along the drill hole path gives us confidence of a match between the seismic and drill hole data. These three models output from the inversion are very similar with only slight differences. This is due to the strong, coherent seismic data constraining the inversion. The multiple models can be summarized by averaging into a rock probability volume. The probability volume provides a measure of uncertainty of the predicted rocks in specific locations within the volume. On the left is the seismic data volume, and on the right is a rock model output from the inversion. Which do we prefer? The seismic volume has a lot of complexities that are challenging to understand. The rock model provides a clear picture of what is in the Earth. The volume provides insight on the orientation of the rocks and the relative thicknesses. I will now focus on the work done at Tropicana. Tropicana was discovered in 2005 by following up a gold in soil anomaly identified in the 1990s. In 2014 and 2015, HiSeis acquired two 3D seismic surveys. The receiver lines are shown in blue and the source lines are shown in red. The gold mineralization is hosted in granulite facies quartzo-feldspathic gneiss. The other dominant rock type is garnet gneiss. Garnet gneiss is commonly present in the hanging wall of nearby mineralization, so understanding the distribution of garnet gneiss leads to a better understanding of mineralization. A key input to the inversion is the seismic data, shown here as a 3D rotating volume. The seismic is generally of good quality, showing zones with bands of bright amplitudes and other zones with relatively dim amplitudes. The mine site drilling can be used to connect zones with the same rock types. The garnet gneiss from drilling is highlighted in black. In general, the garnet gneiss correlates with the higher amplitudes in the seismic volume. One of the key requirements for a successful seismic inversion project is to have changes in rock properties associated with the rocks of interest. On the left are shown 8 drill holes within the seismic volume where both p-velocity and density logs have been acquired to compute p-impedance. The p-impedance in the garnet gneiss rocks is visibly higher than the other rocks. This is also shown statistically in the histogram or PDF on the right. If we now look at a 3D rock model output from the inversion, there is a clear indication of the different rock types, with the garnet gneiss shown in red and the other rocks in blue. The garnet gneiss surfaces in black from drilling show a good correspondence between the modeled garnet gneiss and the drilling intersected garnet gneiss. It is reasonable to assume that the match at the drill hole locations implies the model distribution can be used to infer the position of garnet gneiss away from drill hole control. The position of the gold mineralization from drilling is shown in pink and is located just below a thick sequence of garnet gneiss. The statistical nature of the inversion means that we create multiple rock models that all match the seismic. These multiple rock models can be averaged to create a probability volume. The higher probabilities indicate where a large number of rock models consistently place garnet gneiss in a particular location. The probability volume thus becomes a measure of the uncertainty in our modeled rocks. As with the rock volume, the best way to visualize the model is in 3D. The overlay of the garnet gneiss and mineralization from drilling in black and pink show a similar correspondence to the previous rock model display. If we turn the drilling constrained surfaces into 3D shells, we can appreciate the 3D variability. The drilling constrained mineralization is shown as a pink shell. A shell can also be created from the probability volume by connecting a constant value of 0.5 within the volume. The image now becomes a 3D representation of the garnet gneiss, allowing us to visualize the overall geometry of the rocks and place the mineralization shells into context. By understanding the mine site elastic rock properties, we identify the rocks that can be modeled using the seismic. The garnet gneiss has a high p-impedance, and the feldspathic gneiss has a low p-impedance. The rock models are continuous volumes of data that honor all existing data and infill zones with sparse drilling. The rock models clearly illustrate the rock type distributions and the relationship with mineralization, providing insights for future drill targets. I have shown 2 examples from West Africa and Australia that show the use of seismic for mining. For Yare, the seismic was able to extend the postage stamp of information at the mine site to a large-scale geologic picture of complex geology. The seismic shows the down-dip extension of known mineralization and where to explore beyond the mine site. Perseus have released a press release earlier this year where they indicate the successful use of the seismic volume to identify new mineralization zones. To make the seismic more accessible and easier to understand, I have also illustrated the transformation of the seismic into rock models at the Tropicana gold mine. Thank you.